Morning.
I'm so happy you're here.
I know, I'm pleased to be back.
Oh my God, I'm so happy to see your face.
That's always good to hear.
Goodness. Are you okay?
I'm okay. I'm very up and down, but for the most part, hideously in denial.
Yeah.
That always helps.
Standard.
Yeah.
Goodness. Oh my God, I'm so pleased to be talking to somebody.
Well, there was plenty of people listening.
I know. I started the last episode and Josie listened to it and she went, "Oh my God, you sound so bored." And I said, "It's so difficult to just start a conversation with nothing."
I was thinking that when I was listening to it, because I obviously I did listen. I found the whole episode, I was listening to it and I was thinking this must have been so awkward for you. Like, because obviously you want to make comments about like the story and things like that. And it's like you sort of make a comment and there's just like tumbleweeds.
Crickets.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just like, oh.
Yeah.
But no, they were great stories.
Thank you. But what I enjoy most is getting everybody else's opinion. I love getting everybody else's opinion because sometimes it can seem one-sided. And so that's why I really enjoy getting your feedback and your questions and things that perhaps I hadn't thought of that you think of. And
yeah,
now they're just my opinions now, and that's it.
Your opinions, your ramblings, that's it.
Done.
No, I know. It was it was great. It was a shame that the last one that I did was the horror at Blue John Canyon, because I was just so horrified by that. And that, you know, the title of Horror at Blue John Canyon was so accurate because I found that really, really difficult. But yeah, really put everyone in the picture. Definitely put everyone in the picture.
Yeah. Josie said, what I loved most is that you were squirming in the background going, "Oh, please stop." And I just carried on, like steamrolled over you.
Yeah. Zero fucks given.
Absolutely.
Yes.
You know me.
I will make a quick apology to everyone.
I don't think you need to apologise, but perhaps an explanation.
Well, yeah, I am sorry that I wasn't able to do the last two episodes or even the last Blam. But I lost my dad, so that's why I've been out of touch with pretty much everyone. So I'm dealing with heartache at the moment, but I'm also heavily into denial, which seems to be working for me. So yeah, let me do that. But yeah, I've got my dad's cat lives with us now because I promised him that I would take her and look after her, which we are doing. But we have also got 3 cats already, so we're in the process of mingling them and merging them together. And
how's that going for you?
It's going all right.
They're not the most social creatures, are they?
No, and my oldest rescue cat is very set in her ways. So she's very much, this is my mum, this is my house, these are all my things, all of these bedrooms are mine, the lounge, yes, that's mine, all this food is mine. So she is struggling a little bit, but there hasn't been any fighting. There's been a little bit of swearing and hissing, mainly from me. But yeah, they're doing all right. And you know, whatever happens, she's staying. So yeah, they'll just have to get on with it. But they've all got their own private rooms at the moment, so they're mingling periodically through the day. And then they've got their own rooms at night where they can go off and have some downtime, have some cat time. They have little portion of catnip every evening. So
do they love life?
Keeping them drugged seems to be the best way. But yeah, so that is why I've been away and I've been leaving Sarah to brave it on her own. But she's done a great job, and you all agree as well because I've seen comments and posts. So yeah, well done everyone for supporting Sarah. It wasn't easy. I know it wasn't.
We are very very glad to have you back.
Thank you.
Especially so in this episode, because I saved this episode for your return because it's a very discussionable episode.
I thought you were going to say a very disgusting episode. I was going to say, no, give me a break.
No, discussionable.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, so I saved this one. I wanted to do it, and then I was like, but I've got no one to ask these questions to.
No one to discuss it with.
No one to discuss it with. So I've saved this one specifically.
Brilliant.
We're back. So,
well, I'll explain. I'm also having mad hot flushes at the moment, so I'll be periodically slumping in my seat and fanning myself, and then putting the heater on and wrapping up because I'm cold. And so
that's
it's all fun. It's all fun in my world at the moment. But I'm really glad. I'm really so glad to be back. I've missed everyone. Yeah, and I've missed my poddy.
We're super glad, me especially, super glad to have you back. Do you have a random blam?
I do actually. Do you want me to do mine first?
Yeah.
Right, well, random blams, go. My random blam. It's about grief, because everyone keeps talking to me about grief and giving me advice on what's a good way to grieve. I lost my mum 7 years ago. So I suddenly found myself at a bit of a stage where I kind of felt like an orphan. And I know that sounds, bizarre to everyone, but I've spoken to a couple of people that have lost sort of both parents, and they said the same thing. It's the weirdest feeling. It doesn't matter how old you are. When you're without your parents, you suddenly feel like an orphan. And I found something that was really, possibly really helpful. So some tips. It says you need to support yourself, and you need to give yourself self-care when you're grieving. Try to stay emotionally connected using text, email, messages, as well as social media, phone calls, and for me, podcast. Allow yourself to feel your emotions, even though it's painful. I'm not so good with that one yet. Keep talking to those who are closest to you, even if they are physically far away. Certainly for me, I've got 3 sisters, and 2 of them live abroad. One lives in France, the other one lives all the way over in America. I think it's important to stay close to each other. So we've been sort of video calling and things like that. It says try to phone someone each day. Try and keep your routines, such as meal times. I'm definitely doing that. I'm eating my grief. I seem to be hungry all the time. Getting up, getting washed, dressed, as well as, regular routine, bedtime, things like that. I think sort of been all right with that. Try to get outside and get some fresh air. I'm going to go and do the garden tomorrow. Check in with your children and young people. Understand that your children and young people dip in and out of their emotions quickly. I certainly get that. Their moods change, but then so do mine. Well, maybe I'm a young person.
Young at heart.
Yeah. It says that they'll set their own pace. I'm fine with that. I'm very much the same. I'll go at my own pace. Limit the amount of news and social media that you consume whilst you feel sad, as it can enhance your feelings of like distress and emotion and things like that. Again, I think I'm pretty good with that. I do get a little bit overwhelmed with social media, so I'm not on that as much as maybe younger people are, I suppose. But and it says be tolerant and be kind to yourself. And I think all of those points are really good tips, and it's so I guess some days you'll follow them and some days you won't, you'll do your own thing. But yeah, so my random blam, long drawn out, but hopefully anyone else that's grieving out there. And also, if you are one of our listeners and you're also dealing with grief and you're finding things a little bit difficult, you can reach out to us. We'll try and help each other at the same time. We're both going through it. So if you need me, I'm here. Don't stay away because you want to leave me to my grief, I'm open to our little poddies all over the world, wherever they are. If you need me, I'm here. Get in contact. Sarah will have to let me know though, because I don't touch social media.
I shall forward on any messages.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, sometimes it is helpful to step outside of that box and actually help other people. I know when I was going through cancer and everyone was always checking in on me, how am I, and it kind of gets a little bit like you kind of get stuck in this place of, this is who I am now. But actually, when someone came to me and they had a problem, it actually helped me to then, instead of being the almost victim in a way, to then become the opposite and actually be helpful.
Yeah,
I found definitely. It really helped me.
And so I think sometimes you don't want to be in that situation. You don't want to be someone that's grieving, or someone that's worried, or someone that's ill, or you don't want to be that person. So the fact that sometimes people keep bringing it to your attention, you kind of feel a little bit, oh yeah, I'd kind of put that out of my mind for a minute, and now I'm sort of right back in it, but yeah, I 100% agree. I would much rather go through this with someone else. I mean, it's great that I've got 3 sisters, but obviously I'm mindful that they're also grieving in their own way. So don't be shy. If you need me and Sarah, we're here.
Absolutely. And
we've always got time for you guys.
This next hour or so of podcast is designed to take you away from that for a little bit. So
thanks.
So my random blam. So I don't know if you know who the Somerton Man is, but
I've heard of the Somerton Man, but I think I probably do know it.
You will know the story, yeah.
I couldn't tell you.
So my random blam obviously relates to the episode. So I wanted
Do you mean
to bring
pertains to the episode?
I've been told I say that too much, so I've changed it. It relates to it. I'll swap in and out.
Yes.
So the term Jane Doe and John Doe, I wanted to find out where that come from. Why do we name unidentified people as John Doe and Jane Doe? So it first originated in an old English law in the 1200s. 2 witnesses were required for legal action, and fake names were often used for safety reasons. And what I found most is that it actually comes up when dealing with landlord-tenant disputes. So the tenant was typically labelled as John Doe, a name chosen because it was common. And over the years and centuries, it became a common term to describe an unknown person, and then eventually it was used to describe unidentified bodies. So the term John Doe was quite prevalent first, and then it then changed to Jane Doe when describing a female. But it came up because of this whole tenant-landlord dispute, and it wasn't first to describe an unidentified.
Yeah,
that name was already circulating.
It's just an unknown person.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I didn't know that.
Yeah, me either.
Well, that's cool. That was a cool random blam. Cool.
Right.
All right. Random blams done.
Done. Good morning.
Morning.
Oh, that's so nice to hear you say that, because that's been my line for a little while. Morning. Trying to do like Kate's version.
Yeah. Morning.
So today's episode is one that's been on my list for a little while. And I just didn't have the mental capacity to do it because it's quite all over the place, really. But it is one that we've got quite a heavy Australian listener base. I say fan base. I don't know if they're quite fans.
Oh, I like fan base.
Fan base. We've got a lot of Australian listeners, and they will be very, very well attuned to this case. And I hope that I've done it justice for them, because they will know it a lot better than I do.
I
So
am
I hope
sure
that
you have.
I hope that I've researched it enough. But if I do get any facts wrong, or anything else, then please do bring it to my attention and let me know, because I did do a lot of research, but there was a lot of almost varying information, but varying ever so slightly. About whether a cigarette was lit or unlit, that sort of thing. So there might be slight variations, but I couldn't find out which one was true, because sources say different things. But
yeah,
like I say, it's only very slightly varying.
Well, we do get that a lot, don't we? Where we'll get people saying
his eyes weren't brown, they were green.
Yeah, their eyes weren't this color, or they were that color, and they weren't this, and that never happened, and it's this, and this. And, obviously we do try to get all the facts correct that we can, but we are still just human beings. We're not private investigators or police detectives or anything like that. We're just people, and we get the information that we can get from, I think someone did actually say to us, you can't rely on the information that you get from television, internet and books. And I thought, what? Where else are we supposed
all
to
of
get
places?
Yeah, that's everywhere I go to get my information. And I was like, I don't know where else to get it.
Go directly to the source.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So
for this episode, I travelled to Australia.
That's it. Yeah, interviewed the actual people. Yeah, good.
Yep. No, I was there. So I'm so excited for this episode for you.
So am I.
On the sunny, warm summer morning of December 1st, 1948, which sounds weird to us because December freezing over
Never
here.
sunny.
But that is the beginning of summer in Australia.
Oh yeah, of course.
So December 1st, 1948. Police arrived on the Somerton Beach in Adelaide, Australia, after receiving a call about the body of a middle-aged man lying in the sand. 2 horse riders had seen the man around 6 a.m. on their way up the beach, and then realised on their way back down the beach they hadn't seen this man move at all. So they dismounted and checked on him and found that the man wasn't breathing. So they called the police. When the police arrived, they found that the man was indeed dead, but they couldn't find any obvious causes or any obvious reasons as to why. He was lying on his back, the top half of his body propped up against the seawall, with his legs extended out in front of him and his feet crossed, and an unlit cigarette resting on the collar of his jacket.
Was it unlit?
Perhaps half smoked. We don't know.
We don't know.
He appeared to be mid to late 40s. He was impeccably dressed in a smart double-breasted suit and tie with remarkably shiny, well-kept shoes, and he could not have looked more out of place on this beach.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the strangest thing about the man.
Oh.
Witness came forward and reported seeing the man on the beach the day before, around 7 p.m. A couple saw him lying on the beach in the same spot where he was found, but they'd been sure that they had seen him raise his right arm up to its fullest extent and then let it drop limply back down. So they assumed that he was drunk. He'd just had too many and he'd kind of passed out on the beach. Another couple said that they witnessed the man around 7:30 p.m. that evening, again, laying in the same spot. They'd been there for around half an hour and said that they hadn't seen him move at all, but they hadn't been constantly watching him. So when they kind of looked back, they got the feeling that perhaps he had changed position and they just hadn't seen it. No. But they had mentioned to each other at the time that it was strange because the man was surrounded by mosquitoes. It was a summer evening, so the mosquitoes were everywhere, and they found it strange that he wasn't swatting them away or moving or anything. So again, they assumed that he was drunk and that he had passed out on the beach. So 3 hours after the police arrived, the mystery man was taken to Royal Adelaide Hospital, and there the contents of the man's pockets were removed and laid out on a table. There was an unused second-class rail ticket travelling from Adelaide to Henley Beach. and a bus ticket from the city that may or may not have been used. There was a narrow aluminium comb that had been manufactured in the US, a half-empty packet of juicy fruit chewing gum,
Oh, delicious.
an Army Club cigarette packet which contained 7 cigarettes, but of a more expensive, different brand called Kensitas, and a quarter-full box of Bryant and May matches. He was dressed in a white shirt, a red, white, and blue tie, brown trousers, socks and shoes, a brown knitted pullover, and fashionable grey and brown double-breasted jacket of reportedly American tailoring.
Mm.
So he was very fancy.
Yeah, very fancy, especially for the beach.
However, all of his labels had been removed from his clothes, and like purposely removed, which wasn't too unusual for the time, because when I looked it up, it said after the war, because this was in 1948. So after the war, clothing was actually quite hard to come by. So it was often bought secondhand. So the original owners would remove the tags and then sell it on. So not too unusual, but a little bit suspicious. But what was unusual was the fact that he wasn't wearing a hat. And it said that every man in 1948 wore a hat. Especially, I don't know whether that's like all over the place, but in Australia, every man wore a hat at that time. So they found that quite unusual.
Yeah.
And also unusual was that he didn't carry a wallet, and he had absolutely no identification on him at all. According to the pathologist, John Burton Cleland, the man was of Britisher appearance and thought to be aged between 40 and 45. He was clean shaven and had his hair slicked back, which at the time was quite common of American men. And despite the fact that he was dead, the pathologist said that he was in top physical condition. He was 5'11". He had grey eyes, fair to ginger coloured hair, which was slightly grey around the temples due to his age, with broad shoulders and a narrow waist. His hands and nails were immaculately clean, uncalloused. They showed no signs of any sort of manual labour. He had a few scars on his forearms, and he was missing his bottom incisors. And they weren't just missing or like they'd been removed at all. They hadn't grown in. It was some sort of I don't know, congenital thing that they just hadn't grown in, so they just were never there. His big and little toes were pointed in towards each other, and they kind of met in like a wedge shape. And it was suggested that it was quite similar feet to those of a dancer or someone who wore boots with pointed toes. And he had pronounced high calf muscles, consistent with people who regularly wore boots or shoes with high heels or performed ballet. The autopsy was then conducted, and the pathologist estimated that his time of death was no earlier than 2 a.m, meaning that he had actually been alive when witnesses reported seeing him on the beach at 7 p.m, but was kind of incapacitated because he was so motionless.
Was that when those people saw them put his arm up in the air and then it flopped down? So he was still alive. He was still alive, and they did see that.
Yep.
Okay.
The pathologist recorded that his heart was of normal size and normal in every way. However, he deduced that it was actually heart failure that had led to this man's death, which was very unusual for someone that was in top physical conditions with no signs of outward violence towards his body. So he dug a little deeper, and Falk was deeply congested. There was congestion in the second half of the I knew this word, and I knew it was going to trip me up. Duodenum, which is a part of the portion of the stomach, I believe.
Duodenum, yeah.
Yep. There was blood mixed in with the food in his stomach. Both kidneys were congested, and the liver contained a great deal of excess blood. And his spleen was strikingly large. It was 3 times the size that it should be. And I don't know about you, but I don't want anything in my body to be 3 times the size that it should be.
No. definitely not.
So the congestion that the pathologist found meant that his organs were basically filled with blood and fluid. So the pathologist deemed that, well, he suspected that this man had ingested poison.
Oh.
Whether it was willingly or not, he didn't know. He found that the contents of the man's stomach contained a pasty and that he'd eaten it about 4 hours prior to his death, but he found no traces of any poison in the contents of his stomach. So he sent samples of the man's blood to the chemistry lab to be tested for signs of poisoning. But when they came back, there was absolutely no signs of poison that detected in his blood at all. So all this left the coroner with a real puzzle on his hands. The only practical solution that he was informed of by a different professor, because he sought advice because he couldn't figure out why this man had died. He knew that his heart had stopped, but he couldn't figure out why.
Was he perplexed by it?
That word came up so much in this that people were perplexed.
Oh, it was meant for us.
So he was informed by Professor Sir Cedric Stanton Hicks that perhaps a very rare poison had been used, one that decomposed very, very early after death, leaving no trace of it in the body. The only poisons capable of this were so dangerous and deadly that Professor Hicks would not say their names out loud in an open court because he feared that if people knew of their existence and the accessibility of this, then there would be a lot more of these untraceable deaths. So he actually wrote it down on a piece of paper and then passed it to the coroner.
Pushed it across the desk.
So there were two possible suspects, digitalis and stropanthin. So stropanthin is a rare glycoside, which is derived from the seeds of an African plant. And historically, it was used by a Somali tribe to poison the tips of their arrows. And digitalis is also plant-based. And it comes from the dried leaves of the foxglove plant.
Oh, yeah.
Which is quite heard of. So both plants are actually used in medication to treat heart failure, but in larger quantities are fatal and actually cause heart failure.
Right.
So, but the coroner was unable to prove that poison was the reason that this man's heart had failed, and he was unable to say whether it was suicide or murder. And the police were equally as baffled by this man's identity. Dental records taken didn't match anything that they had in the database, and fingerprints taken also didn't match anything in the Australian database. So these were then circled throughout the English-speaking world, and no match ever came back. A photo of the man was circled throughout Australia, and he then became known as the Somerton Man because he was found on Somerton Beach.
And he was a man.
Exactly. Anyone thinking that they could identify the man was brought down to the morgue to see him in person. So people thinking that this was their missing loved ones, and they were distraught to see that when they came down to the morgue that it wasn't their missing family that they'd assumed that it was. And one man claimed that he was a pipe-smoking labourer by the name of McLean, but police said that his hands were too smooth to belong to a labourer, and there was no evidence that he ever smoked a pipe. So not one single person recognised him or was able to identify him. On the 10th of December, the decision was made to embalm the Somerton Man to help preserve him until they could get a positive ID. But by January, all leads had completely dried up. So out of sheer desperation, the police decided to reach out and ask that any unclaimed luggage from hotels or lost property or dry cleaners or railway stations be brought to their attention. And this did actually turn up a lead. On the 14th of January, detectives were made aware of a suitcase that had been left at Adelaide railway station since 11 a.m. on the morning of the 30th of November, so the day prior to the finding of Somerton Man. And this lined up with police's theory that the Somerton Man had actually arrived in Adelaide that morning based on the train and bus tickets found in his pocket. They believed he'd arrived in Adelaide Railway by overnight train from either Melbourne or Sydney on the morning of the 30th of November.
Right.
They then speculated that he'd got off the train and gone to the adjacent city baths to shower and shave, and then returned to the railway station to purchase a ticket for the 10:50 train to Henley Beach, which they found in his pocket, but he did not board. He then checked his suitcase in to the railway suitcase place at around 11 a.m. and then caught the bus to Glenelg, where he disembarked and made his way to Somerton Beach. The staff at the railway station couldn't remember anything about the person that had originally checked in this suitcase, and the contents didn't reveal anything different. In the case was a red checked dressing gown, a size 7 red felt pair of slippers, 4 pairs of underpants, which were the same brand that the Somerton Man had on. There was pajamas, shaving items, a light brown pair of trousers with sand in the turned up cuffs, an electrician's screwdriver, a table knife that had been cut down into a short, sharp point, a pair of scissors whose ends had been sharpened, a small square of zinc that they thought had been brought to use as like a sheath for the knife and the scissors, a stenciling brush, which was used by third officers on merchant ships for stenciling cargo, and some of the same orange thread that had been used to repair a hole in the Somerton Man's trouser pocket. So they were able to link up this suitcase to the Somerton Man, because they said that this, not only was he wearing the same pants as the ones that were found in the suitcase, but this orange thread, it was like a waxy thread that he'd used to repair a hole in his trousers, wasn't available in the Australia at that time. So they recognised this thread was almost foreign.
Yeah.
They also found in the suitcase the coat that was in there. There was a stitch used in that coat that was known as a feather stitch, and it wasn't used in Australia. And they brought a tailor in to identify the stitchwork on this coat, and he identified it as being from America. So they thought that, they knew that the coat hadn't been imported. It wasn't something that they sold in Australia. So that suggested that either the man had travelled from America or he had bought the coat from someone that had. What was unusual about the contents of the suitcase were that there was no spare socks and there was no correspondence either. But the police did find pencils and unused letters, stationery and things, but he had still no identifying marks at all in the suitcase. So it seemed like any chance of identifying the Somerton Man through his suitcase had also been erased, because the brand of the case had been removed from the side. Name tags and maker's marks had been removed from all but 3 of the items of clothing in the suitcase. Police actually found the name T. Keane that was on a tie, Keane on a laundry bag, and the word Keane on a singlet, but spelled different variations of the spelling. So Keane on the tie, Keane on the laundry bag, and then Kean on something else. So they actually believed that whoever had removed the tags, the rest of the tags from all the other items, had purposely left these tags on, knowing that Keane wasn't the man's name and knowing that it was essentially a red herring. A search of immigration records for Keane brought up no other leads either. There was nobody missing by that name. Another unusual aspect of the suitcase was that if the Somerton Man had checked his suitcase in at the railway station, he would have been given a receipt, a piece of paper, so that he could come back and collect his luggage when needed. But no such receipt was ever found in the initial search. So police decided to conduct another search of his body. This time it was in April in 1949. And this time, the pathologist found some things that had been missed. And they were just more confusing pieces of this nonsensical puzzle.
Oh, so that didn't help.
The pathologist noticed that the man's shoes were well polished, which we already knew. But they weren't just well polished, they were spotless.
Right.
They weren't the shoes of a man that had walked the distance of Somerton Beach and then laid down in the position that he had been found. They weren't covered in sand. You know, if you're walking on the beach, you'd think they'd be covered. The pathologist noticed as well that there was almost no signs of poisoning. There was no foaming at the mouth. There was no vomiting anywhere. And those are all things that are incredibly common with poisoning.
Yeah.
So that kind of made the police suspect that he had been poisoned somewhere else and then been carried to this location and left there, incapacitated, but still somewhat alive. And they believed that what the witnesses had seen with his arm going up and coming down was probably the last involuntary arm spasm movement before his death. The last thing that this second search found was the most cryptic of all of the clues. Hidden inside a tiny little pocket sewn into the inside of the man's trousers was a rolled up bit of scrap paper that had been torn from a book. And it was typed in an elaborate font. And the words were 2 words: Tamam Shud.
What?
Around this time, though, the Somerton man's body had started to decay despite the embalming attempts. So after this second search was conducted, police decided to take a plaster cast of the man's head and face, and they called it a death mask. And that was for future reference so that they could go back and look at it. But they actually decided to bury him. And the South Australian Grandstand Bookmakers Association actually pulled together the money and paid for a service and a gravestone for this mystery man because they didn't want him to have a pauper's burial. In June of 1949, 6 months after he had been found, the Somerton man was buried in Adelaide's West Terrace Cemetery in a plot that would be easily accessible should they need to exhume his body. And his headstone, he had a nice headstone made, and his headstone reads, "Here lies the unknown man who was found at Somerton Beach, 1st of December 1948. Shortly after his burial, a police reporter got wind of this piece of paper that had been found and recognised the words Tamam Shud and knew that they were Persian. So he telephoned the police to translate these words for them. And he said that the words meant, "It is ended." He told police that the page could potentially have come from a book of poetry written in the 12th century called the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. The book itself had been translated into English in 1859 and had then become popular in Australia during the war between loved ones that had been separated. The theme of the Rubaiyat is that one should live life to the fullest and have no regrets when it ends. So that kind of made it more popular during the war, so that when loved ones were separated, they didn't know what was going to happen, so they often gave it to their loved ones as a gift. But the poem's subject led police to theorise that the Somerton man had actually committed suicide and then torn this out of the book as almost symbolism, put it in his pocket. It is ended. However, there was no other evidence to suggest that he had committed suicide. And that didn't seem to fit with everything else. This copy of the Rubaiyat, where the page had been torn from, had this like fancy elaborate font. It was different from a normal copy of the Rubaiyat. So police were quite hopeful that they would be able to identify where it had come from and then get some more answers. So they began searching through libraries and bookshops in Adelaide. And when that turned up nothing, they put out a nationwide appeal and they publicised this scrap bit of paper and its distinctive font. And on the 22nd of July, someone came forward with a copy of the book. A man that has never formally been identified, but is known by the pseudonym Ronald Francis, came forward with a copy of the Rubaiyat that he had found in his brother-in-law's glove box of his car. He said that the book had appeared on the back seat of the car on the 30th of November. So again, that differs between sources. It's either been found on the back seat of the car or the floor well of the car. Okay. Nonetheless, it was found randomly in the car. So they had actually both assumed that the other person, so the brother-in-law and Ronald Francis, had kind of got in the car and seen this book, and Ronald Francis had assumed it was the brother-in-law's, and the brother-in-law had assumed it was Ronald Francis. Neither one of them kind of questioned it. But he now assumed that perhaps it had been somebody had thrown it through an open window when the car was parked. And the car was parked on that day, just 1 block away from Somerton Beach.
Oh, okay.
The police then inspected this book, and they took out the ripped piece of paper that had been found in the hidden pocket, and they managed to line it up perfectly with this copy of the Rubaiyat. Now, it wasn't an entire page that had been torn out. It was a segment of a page. And it perfectly matched this book. But instead of solving the mystery of this piece of paper and the Somerton Man, the mystery deepened still. This copy of the Rubaiyat was a very rare first edition of the English translation from 1859. It was incredibly rare and incredibly valuable. So if this book had belonged to the Somerton Man, then why had he decided to purchase such a rare copy, tear out this specific page, and then just throw away his expensive rare book, walk to the beach and commit suicide? And if this wasn't his book, then he's borrowed it from someone or stolen it from somebody, and somebody would have noticed that their incredibly rare book had not been brought back. But nobody did. On closer inspection of the back cover of this book, police found some markings that were indented in. They looked as though whoever it was had written on a piece of paper but had used the book to lean on. So the letters had been indented into the back page of this book. They also found a telephone number that had been written on the back cover. So they finally had a solid piece of evidence, something to kind of move forward on. So using a magnifying glass to get a better look at these indented markings, police found that it was five lines of seemingly random letters. I'll put a picture out on social media, but I'm going to try and describe it to you.
Okay.
So these were all in capitals. The first line, WRGOABABD. So completely nonsensical. It's not a word. Underneath that, MLIAOI, but that's been crossed out. Underneath that, WTBIMPANETP. Underneath that, but midway through the line, a funny, weird X, like a symbol of an X, but not an X. Underneath that are again 2 more lines of just random letters. So immediately investigators believed that this was some sort of secret code that related to this specific book, because over time this Rubaiyat had been translated from Persian, and it had different publications, different translations. So they actually varied. This book varied between different publications. So investigators believed that this secret code related specifically to this book, and that if they'd got another copy of the Rubaiyat, they wouldn't be able to identify what this secret code was. So they brought in code breakers from all over, and to this day, the code remains unbroken. Nobody's got any idea what this code was.
For God's sake, should we try and solve it? Can you imagine?
Some experts believe it's just the meaningless product of a disturbed mind, because they just couldn't figure out any sense to it. So police decided to focus their attention on the telephone number. That was something that they could do, that they could kind of move forward with. They found that the number was unlisted, but they did manage to track it down to a young woman that just happened to live 5 minutes away from Somerton Beach.
Well,
During the investigation, she's known as Jeston, that's kind of a nickname, or there was a pseudonym that she's referred to, which was Teresa Johnson. The reason that they used these nicknames and pseudonyms was because the police were quite careful about wanting to protect the identity of these witnesses that come forward, because this woman in particular didn't want to be related to this case, but she wanted to help. She didn't want her name out there. But in later years, after she had kind of passed away, her family decided that it was okay to release her name. And she was actually a 27-year-old nurse called Jessica Thompson. So when police confronted her, Jessica said that she didn't know this unknown man. She didn't know why he had a number written down. But she did say that she had once owned a copy of the Rubaiyat, but she had given it to a man during the war. And it's thought that this pair, her and this man in the war, had an affair, really. But their relationship was never disclosed. But she told investigators that the man's name was Alfred Boxall. So they were getting somewhere now. They had a name. So they actually theorised that this was the case of a jilted lover come back to visit the woman he loved one last time before taking his own life. That's what police thought, until they done some digging and found that Alfred Boxall was alive and well, living in Maroubra in South Wales. And he still had his copy of the Rubaiyat that Jessica had given him, with all of its pages intact. So Alfred Boxall was not the Somerton Man.
Put a line through that one then.
Yep. That was the only one on there.
I'm making notes, by the way. I'm still listening. I'm making notes.
I'm trying to solve it.
Yeah.
So despite this, Jess said that she would help assist the investigation in any way that she could. She had told police that sometime the previous year, she could not be certain of the date, but she had come home to be told by her neighbours that an unknown man had called and asked for her, but she never found out who it was. She was asked if she would be happy to go down to the morgue to see if she recognised the Somerton Man. And by this time, the Somerton Man had been buried. So it was just this death cast of his face that was there. So when they brought her down there and she was confronted with this plaster cast, police noticed that her reaction was anything but normal. Oh. They said, quote, she was completely taken aback to the point of giving the appearance that she was about to faint.
Oh.
And being a nurse during the war, police knew that her reaction wasn't to the fact that it was a plaster cast of a dead man's face, but to more to who it belonged to.
Yeah.
But despite her reaction, Jessica said that she did not recognise this man. And with that, she pretty much extinguished the only remaining lead that the police had. In 1958, the South Australia coroner published the final results of his investigation, and his report reads, quote, I am unable to say who the deceased was. I am unable to say how he died, and I'm unable to say what the cause of death was. Right. The code in the book has never been cracked.
Until today.
Dun, dun, dun. It was actually given out to engineering students in 2009 as a subject to see if anyone could crack it, but nobody was able to. Wow. And nobody has ever come forward with the knowledge of who the Somerton Man was or could be. But someone must have known him. As late as 1978, flowers would be found at odd intervals on his grave. But no one could ascertain who had left them there or why. There was never a note or anything, just sporadic flowers. So who was the Somerton Man? I hear you ask.
Who was the Somerton Man?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Kate, because here are the theories. Go. So in 1959, a witness actually came forward to say that he and 3 others had seen a well-dressed man carrying another man on his shoulders along Somerton Beach the night before the body was found.
Aha.
So Was it murder? The most speculated theory, or the theory across all the internet, was that the Somerton Man was a Russian spy. Because of the suspected poisoning, because of the type of poison that could potentially have been used, which made it impossible to be traced, coupled with the oddities surrounding the case, the Rubaiyat and this coded message that had been left on there, the fact that there was no identification, that everything had been removed from the Somerton Man's clothes and the suitcase and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But no one knows why he would have been murdered. So was it suicide? One theory suggests that the Somerton Man was actually the father of Jessica Thompson's little boy, Robin. Experts in more recent years took the photo of the Somerton Man and Robin as an adult, and they noted that there were similarities between his ears and his teeth. They found that Robin had the same missing front two incisors as the Somerton Man, and the same distinctive ears. When I post a picture of the Somerton Man, he's got quite distinctive ears. And they said that Jessica Thompson's son, Robin, looked awfully similar to the Somerton Man. And Robin actually grew up to be a ballet performer, and he performed with the Australian Ballet School. So could he have inherited that from his father? Because the coroner noted that his calves were dancer-like and he had these pointed toes. And the theory suggests that he basically committed suicide after Jessica said to him that she wanted nothing to do with him, and she wanted him to have nothing to do with Robin, his potential son. Because at the time, she was either, again, I'm not too sure, she was either married or due to be married at the time of the Somerton Man's death. So had he come back to profess his love and want to be part of her family and part of his son's life, and then she said no, so he went and committed suicide. But what was the random coded message about? The fact that this Rubaiyat bit was found in his pocket, and one expert that was trying to crack the code believed that the bottom line of these 5 lines of text, which it's quite a long random sequence of letters. It's ITTMTSAMSTGAB. And he thought that perhaps it was the first letter of each of these words in a sequence. And he thought that the words were, "It's time to move to South Australia, Mosley Street." And Mosley Street was where Jessica lived at the time.
Oh.
But I feel like that's just somebody trying to make that fit.
Yeah.
I don't think that's what that is.
There's just as much chance of it not being that as it is being that. So, yeah.
So, was it an accident? One theory suggests that his death was just a complete accident, and that he had simply fallen asleep on the beach up against the seawall, but had slipped down the seawall and making it difficult for him to breathe and therefore asphyxiating. I don't believe that, because there was a lot of damage to his internal organs, a lot of blood in his in his stomach and his enlarged spleen, and the fact that his shoes were, he hadn't just wandered along the beach, because his shoes were immaculate.
Yeah, I don't think it was an accident.
It seems as though the mystery perhaps recently has been solved. When I first started this story, the only thing that I could find was the fact that the mystery had been solved. The mystery had been solved. And I was like, I don't want to know about the solved mystery. I want to know about the mystery. So I had to really search the internet to find the actual false, what had gone on. But recently, a university professor, Professor Abbott, he had become somewhat obsessed with this case. And through decades of research, he was able to come up with this theory about him being Robin's father. He then managed to track down a daughter that Robin had, but had given up for adoption.
Right.
He then went to meet this woman and to say that potentially she's related to the Somerton Man, because she would actually have been the Somerton Man's granddaughter.
Granddaughter, yeah.
What happened was they actually fell in love and they decided to marry. And he was so sure that she was the Somerton Man's granddaughter that he actually managed to get some DNA from this plaster death mask that they'd made, because there had been some hair trapped in this plaster cast. So he got the DNA from this hair to use to match up to the DNA of his now wife. It didn't match.
Can I just make a point on that?
Go on.
You say there was a hair in the plaster thing, but who's to say that it wasn't from someone else that was involved in making this death mask?
That's very true. That's very, very true. But
so she might not be related to the person that made the death mask.
Absolutely might not. Yeah, who knows? But what they did find through this DNA of the hair that they assume is the Somerton Man's.
It's not.
In July 2022, he teamed up with a renowned forensic expert called Colleen Fitzpatrick, and she specialised in cold cases. And together they searched through these genealogy sites, and with this DNA, they managed to find a very distant cousin that would have been related to the Somerton Man.
Ooh.
And from 4,000 names, they managed to track it down basically to one person, Carl Webb. They then tracked down the man's living relatives using their DNA to confirm Carl Webb was whoever's hair this was, whether it was Somerton Man or somebody that's fallen into the plaster cast. But let's assume it was taken from the Somerton Man.
Fine.
So who was Carl Webb?
Yeah, who was he?
Carl Webb was born on November 16th, 1905 in Footscray, and had 5 older siblings named Russell, Frida, Gladys, Doris, and Roy. His brother Roy, who had this striking resemblance to the Somerton Man, had enlisted in the Australian military in July 1940 before his death in 1943. There are death certificates for every single of his siblings, but not him. One of the most interesting finds that Professor Abbott had found had been images of Carl Webb's nephew, John Russell Keane, who served in the RAAF and who also looked quite similar to the Somerton Man. John Keane had died during the war in Europe, and his possessions were sent home to his parents, Gerald and Frida Keane. So, when the Somerton Man was found, he had a tie and some other belongings with the name Keane on it.
Which they thought was a red herring.
Yes. So, one of the tags read T. Keane. But when they actually uncovered, they found a copy of John Keane's signature. And they believed that the handwriting looked similar to that was written on the Somerton Man's tags. So this T. Keane could actually have perhaps been a J.
Yeah.
Is what they're saying.
Okay.
More digging into the family revealed that the Webbs owned a bakery, but it wasn't clear if Carl would have worked there or not. But the Somerton Man had scars up his forearms that could potentially have been burns. I did also read somewhere, but I didn't find it corroborated, that Carl Webb had been an electrical engineer, and the Somerton Man had some sort of electrical screwdriver in his suitcase. They also found that Carl was very athletic and played community football, and a photo had been found of the football team, which may have included Carl, but hasn't yet been verified. A marriage certificate found states that in 1941, Carl Webb married Dorothy Robertson, and the pair was listed as living on Domain Road in South Yarra. And he would have been 35 at the time, and his wife, Dorothy, would have been 21. The following year, they moved to Bromby Street. And in 1951, Carl, so this was after the time that the Somerton Man had died, Carl Webb's wife, Dorothy, put a public notice in the Age newspaper in Melbourne, publicising that she had started divorce proceedings against her husband on the grounds of desertion. So I'll read it to you. I've got the article here, and it says, it's incredible. It blows my mind that in 1951, if you're going to divorce someone, you put an ad in the paper. So this ad reads, to Carl Webb, formerly of Bromby Street, South Yarra, but now of parts unknown, take notice that your wife, Dorothy Jean Webb, has instituted divorce proceedings against you on the ground of desertion, and that unless you enter an appearance in the Prothonotatory's office of the Supreme Court at Melbourne on or before the 29th day of October in 1951, the case may proceed in your absence and you may be ordered to pay costs. So, Carl Webb never showed for his divorce proceedings, and therefore the relationship ended in divorce. But the fact that it's put down as desertion meant that his wife didn't even know where he had gone.
Yeah.
She didn't know why he had gone missing or where he had gone to. So if Professor Abbott is correct about this identification and about the fact that Carl Webb was the Somerton Man, what led him to his death on the beach? And if he was from the area, why did nobody report him missing or identify his picture in the newspaper? But it's actually down to the coroner to formally make this identification.
Yeah.
So it isn't actually known if Carl Webb is the Somerton Man. That's just speculation based on what this professor has found. Yeah. But if the Somerton Man is Carl Webb, I don't think we'll ever really know the mystery around his death and what led up to it.
No.
But that is the story of the Somerton Man.
Oh God, that is very, very perplexing.
So perplexing, isn't it?
Yeah, and I have questions.
Go on.
So you said that they said that maybe the mystery code that he had in his pocket was potentially just sort of ramblings of a madman. But there's no other sign of anything chaotic, really, is there? Other than the fact that, you know, he's dead and he's on the beach, and it's like, you know,
he didn't look like a madman. He was impeccably dressed.
That's what I mean. It's like everything
he took care of himself,
organized, uniform, put together, set out. I don't.
So that's what made people believe that he was a Russian spy. The fact that he was so well dressed and his shoes were so polished. His nails had recently been clipped and cleaned. He was recently shaven. His hair was slicked back. Like, he was very presentable and took care of himself.
I do think the code means something. I don't know what, but we'll come back to you because I'm sure we'll work it out.
Have you just looked up the code? Have you Googled it? While we've been talking? Okay, because what they're saying is that the second line that's been crossed out is quite similar to the fourth line. So perhaps that what he crossed out was an error, and then he started it again. But this weird X symbol is above an O, so they feel like that is relevant. But it's just a jumble of letters. And at first they thought that the W was an M, because it's not quite clear, but there's a
it's very
M's.
high. Very high.
Very high. It looks like an M, but actually if you look at the M looks more like an M than the M looks like an M does. So they've ascertained that it's actually a W. But it is just scribblings, isn't it? It's not it. There's no way we can crack it.
I do think it means something though, because I agree. The second line that he's crossed out, he's put MLIAOI, and then I think he's thought, no, wait a minute.
Oh, that's wrong.
Yeah, I've done that because it looks like he's missed out the B.
Yeah.
Because on the fourth line he's put MLIABO.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's like a space, and then there's another one.
Yeah. But I mean, even if it is cracked, it could mean absolutely nothing regarding his death.
Yeah.
It could just be something that he's done for himself.
Something that just means something to him. But I think
an absolute red herring.
Yeah. I do think that obviously is something that means something to him.
Yeah.
And possibly like something that he used to put in practice when he was in the military, or maybe he was still in the military, and I don't know what. So that's that. The Rubaiyat that you said had indentation, like someone had been leaning on it and writing. Yeah. That shows me that either they had no idea that it was a priceless first edition, because you wouldn't lean on it if it was something that.
That's a very good point.
The only kind of, that's going to be the majority of his money or possible money or anything like that. You wouldn't lean on it and mark it if it was worth a lot of money.
Also, just on that note,
care.
Yeah, just on that note, at the time of the Somerton Man's death, when Professor Abbott was researching about Carl Webb, they found he was actually selling a lot of his possessions. He was selling a car. I can't remember what other things, but he was selling a few other, quite a lot of things that he'd found publications for in the newspaper. So if Carl Webb is the Somerton Man and he did have this incredibly rare book,
wouldn't he have sold that?
That would be something that you'd sell, not his car.
Yeah.
Things. But was he selling his belongings?
And obviously he ripped a part out of it as well.
Yeah.
So that's that. You said about Jessica and the fact that he may have been the father of her child, and maybe she said, I don't want anything to do with you. I'm guessing that they would have looked into the fact that if she was already married or due to be married, what about the fact that the husband might have found out and done something to him?
Jessica wasn't really questioned very much. Okay. And the question that she did receive was quite very sort of gentle questioning. It wasn't anyway direct or anything.
Did you kill him? I mean, you don't have to say now. Don't say now.
Sorry.
Don't trouble yourself.
So she never was really in the frame for anything. And although they kind of suspected it was poisoning, during this the whole Somerton investigation, it was never launched as a murder inquiry.
Right. So they were pretty convinced that he'd just died.
They were pretty convinced that it was poison, but they couldn't, there was no evidence to suggest that it was poison. There was no poison in his system.
Well, that leads on to my next question, which is, if it was suicide, wouldn't there be some evidence of, like, a small glass bottle or something like that where he'd taken something? He was there for quite a long time. If he got his train tickets, he got there on November 30th. And by 7 o'clock that evening, he was obviously so bad that he was really unable to move. He was just able to put his arm in the air, and then it sort of flopped down limply. I don't know. How long do poisons take to work? Did they search?
If it ingested the digitalis or the strepanthin and it was a lethal dosage, it wouldn't have taken hours. It would have been quite quick. Quite quickly. Within a half an hour. But again, you'd get that foaming and that vomit. And
Yeah.
I don't think it would have been a peaceful death. The fact that he's laying there with his legs crossed.
Yeah.
He literally looks like he's fallen asleep.
Like he's just gone asleep.
Yeah. So, which leads me to believe that he was probably placed that way.
Yeah, and someone said they saw
Someone carrying
a man over his shoulder.
Yeah. Because
I
the
think
Somerton
it's murder.
Yeah, the Somerton man got there at we checked his suitcase in at 11 o'clock. So then that's 8 hours of wandering around, and he would have been walking around that whole time. He didn't have a car. He'd caught the train there, but his shoes were immaculately polished. There was no scuff marks or anything. So they they suspect that he was given this poison, and then on the verge of death or whatever, that he was taken to this to the beach and then laid there, and then that's when he died.
Yeah, he screams like military to me. The fact that his shoes,
he's so well presented.
When I was younger, I was in the cadets, and the one thing that I remember the most, and that was just from cadets, was we had to really polish our shoes, like really, really well, like the dress shoes and things like that. It was like a ritual. And I think for him to have like spotless shoes, and the fact that they weren't scuffed at all from like the sand, I think he was put there.
So I actually believed that he was Jessica Thompson's lover, and that the son Robin was his, and that's kind of what I believed because of the whole dancing ballet thing and whatever else.
Yeah.
But the proof that potentially this man is Carl Webb is quite overwhelming. However, you were absolutely right that hair might not have come from the Somerton man. That might well have been trapped and just been from somebody that took the cast.
Yeah.
Or from the person that murdered the Somerton man.
Can't they exhume him and get DNA?
Has recently, in 2019, he has been exhumed, but there is no information as to why or anything that's come out of that. But he has been exhumed.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, that's where I'm going to leave you. I'm going to leave you with that.
Can you give us an update if you find out what happened when he was exhumed? Well, that would have been like 5 years ago now.
Yeah, so maybe I'll do some more digging.
Yeah, maybe we'll do maybe we could do a blam on any updates.
Update. Yeah,
that'd be good.
Yeah, and I'm sure for the Australians listening, I'm sure you have more information on this, because if I lived in Australia and knew of the Somerton man, I'd be obsessed with this.
Definitely. Let us know. Don't come at us.
Yeah, don't come at us, please.
Don't come at us.
Politely let me know my mistakes.
Instead of coming at us, come with us.
Come with us. That's so great.
With us. Teach us. Tell us.
Yeah.
We're open to it. I just don't take kindly to people coming at me.
Yeah.
Bro.
Okay, well, that's where I'm going to leave today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it.
I did.
It was a very perplexing case.
It was.
For everybody involved.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yeah. Well, Tubby came and listened as well partway through.
Yep.
Yeah. She got her facts, got her information, then she's gone off with a notepad. So yeah. Good. We may hear back from her.
Okay, well, thank you very much for listening.
Thanks very much for talking.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
If you have enjoyed listening to our episodes, make sure you rate us and leave us a review on whatever platform you are listening.
We absolutely love hearing from you guys. So you can also help support our show by donating to our Buy Me a Coffee link. We will make sure that you get a massive shout out and a big thank you in our next week's episode.
You can also follow us on social media at Perplexed Podcasts. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and if you want to see more videos and blooper reels, subscribe to our TikTok and YouTube channels.
You can also email us your stories at perplexedpodcasts@gmail.com.
And you can find all the relevant links in the episode descriptions. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.